Avi then went on to co-found the LEAP organization in 2017 and serve as its strategic director. The organization builds on the manifesto, seeking solutions and collective action. We welcome Avi.
I've been thinking back to the way that Ellen started this conversation with all of us. Ellen Gabriel is one of our great teachers and resistance leaders, and I thought that she started us off yesterday in a spirit of loving hard truths. And there is no better spirit than one of unvarnished honesty from which to begin these critical conversations. I think the organizers of this conference have done a fabulous job. The presenters and facilitators and every one of you have made this a really energizing experience. And I hope that you appreciated, as I did, the innovative and at times risky conference design. The art and the open empty spaces, they actually put up a whole board of empty spaces and we had to fill it. Unlike so many gatherings that we've all been to, there was plenty of time for interaction and group discussion in this time we've spent together, and the one-way dynamic of traditional lecturing was kept to a minimum. So I promise to take that spirit to heart and limit my closing remarks to a tight and economic 90 minutes, after which you can all stagger to the elevators, clutching your heads in agonized despair. No? All right, fine. I'll keep it brief and upbeat. How about that? Better? Okay. I do feel, though, that I need to start by bringing some of the big picture in. While we were huddling in our open spaces this afternoon, feverishly planning our revolution of public ownership and control of both the heights and the depths of our society, in Toronto, many thousands of people gathered in a spirit of jubilant defiance and resistance at the very first rally of the Doug Ford era in Ontario. Yes. The Rally for Decent Work, as it was called, co-sponsored by Fight for 15 and Fairness and the Ontario Federation of Labour, is a stirring reminder that many of us are headed into a long 4 years of the return of unvarnished right-wing rule. Not to say that the Liberals, or more accurately, the fake progressive neoliberals, haven't done untold damage in the last 15 years in my province, but the next 4 are going to be brutal. And here in Quebec, if the polls and the current political landscape remains as is, are not looking all that different. But our conference here and the rally in Toronto today do have some important notes in common, and I think it's worth just a few words on how we're in sync with those folks who are beginning a new phase of resistance to what will unquestionably be a new phase of attacks on the most vulnerable in our society. Because like at this gathering, the people at Queen's Park today are not just saying no to privatization and the harsh logic of austerity. They are also renewing their commitment to being bold, to advancing truly inclusive and ambitious alternatives, and proclaiming a big, radical, joyous yes to the world that we want as a conscious tactic in the fight against the cutting and slashing to come. And that rally, by the way, didn't just have labor leaders. It's a coalition of community organizations and game-changing social movements, from Fight for 15 and Fairness itself, to Black Lives Matter, to disability justice, to activists in the Health for All networks. And we at The Leap are proud to have representation on the platform in the person of one Naomi Klein. I read her speech on my phone this afternoon before she gave it, and it was blistering. I considered just reading it to you here today instead of remarks of my own, but apart from the real risk of debilitating imposter syndrome that evoked, I also probably wouldn't get through it without an excess of emotion that would be, frankly, unseemly in a person of advanced middle age like myself. So you are stuck with my thoughts this time. But there is something happening both here and there that I think is significant. David McDonald laid it out with great economy and clarity last night. It is time for a great pivot. We defenders of the public cannot stay on the defensive, just as Larry said, as attacks on public services ramp up once again. We cannot be a movement of no. We need to inspire more people with our alternatives. We need, as much for ourselves and our own spirits as for the wider society, to articulate with ever greater detail and imagination our yeses, our proposals. We need to unleash our utopian imagination in the face of Trump and Ford and intolerance and repressive rage. The battle for the public is the battle of our time. And we need to bring not just our resistance, but our creativity to that fight. And the battle for the public is clearly not just a battle of public versus private interests. It's a contest over the meaning of the public, of what and whom that term includes, who it excludes, and what it represents. Because right now, the public sphere, as everyone in this room knows, is a place wounded and ground down by decades of austerity and privatization. And as David also reminded us, a pro-public movement can and must defend and uplift the brave and dedicated public workers who hold our battered public services together through the sheer tenacity of their commitment and their compassion. But they are mostly overburdened and insufficient public services. And we have to have the courage and moral clarity to be forthright and say so. Just as Cindy Blackstock did last night, when she challenged us with the fact that there are 4 times as many Indigenous children in child welfare care today than there ever were kids in residential school. That is a moral and political failure of criminal proportions. And we who believe passionately in the public must say so. Just as Borna Ballantyne did this morning, thank you so much for that amazing session on childcare. When Morna started her presentation by reminding us that we don't have universal childcare anywhere in Canada, including in the much vaunted however many dollars a day daycare in Quebec. In this country, we hand our children to the market. Whether they are nonprofits or municipalities or private companies, I'm just channeling Morna and plagiarizing freely now. What we have is a bunch of suppliers of daycare and a bunch of consumers of daycare. Supply and demand in the most precious and formative part of our public, the youngest humans in our society. So we cannot and we must not defend a broken status quo. We do the public no service by fighting rearguard actions alone to hang on to the tattered shreds of the welfare state. We must go further, much further. Because the public, and I've been reminded of this hour by hour in the past time we've spent together, the public itself is highly contested terrain at this unbelievable historical moment that it is our fate to live through. Populism has upended all political conventions, from Brexit to Trump to Ford, and the regressive forces of the political right are co-opting public outrage like mad, and they're doing it better than we are. We should be honest about that too. If you go to the page of Ontario Proud, an organization which displays an absurd number, more than 300,000 Facebook followers, an organization started by a hard-right conservative political operative, which advances really despicable and highly successful social media messaging and attacks, circulating some of the most disturbing material you can see online about progressive or self-described progressive politicians in my province in the last couple of years. If you go to that page, and I'm not saying you should, you will see a banner at the top of the page proudly and loudly proclaiming the slogan, "For the many, not the few." A slogan stolen, of course, from the inspiring and game-changing, forthrightly left-wing campaign of Jeremy Corbyn and his social movement momentum machine. So the question of populism, whether genuine or cynically constructed and fake, is at the heart of whether or not the future is truly public. And for me, this conference has really crystallized that challenge. We cannot unthinkingly defend what is broken. We have to fix it. And that means not by romanticizing or attempting to restore some bygone era, which, if we look honestly, was never inclusive or universal at all. We have to fix it by bravely imagining a new public, by generating proposals, bold, inventive, and radical proposals. Proposals that intentionally defy what is considered politically possible. what is defined as politically possible by the very serious people who very seriously tell us what we're allowed to imagine. And this conference has been an unprecedented celebration of exactly that kind of thinking, which stretches and expands the political imagination with bold and innovative proposals. What we've done in the last 20 hours or so has been to share and advance an expansive and democratic vision of the public, a truly inclusive one. With the organizers' admirable emphasis on success stories, we've begun to explore our utopian imagination in the service of a struggle that has frankly never been more high stakes. So let me share with you some of the more powerful moments and inspiration that I'm going to take away with me from this gathering. First of all, our public includes, first and foremost, the original public of Turtle Island. As Ellen Gabriel said, when Indigenous communities rebuild their institutions, our settler culture will benefit too. But remember Ellen's words. You've got to help us get there. Don't take the lead, walk beside us. We also walk beside a surging movement of remunicipalization, a term that could only have been coined by academics. and a term which surely, like almost everything, must sound better in Spanish. Miriam Planas wowed us with an inside look at the world-changing movement that she is part of in Catalonia. With the city of Terrassa, the fourth biggest in that region, with 200,000 people taking back control of its water system, it was gripping to hear how those breakthroughs were achieved. And I love how systematic the Catalonian social movement thinking is. First, discover what's going on. Second, react to what we don't like. Third, build and enlarge a political consensus, that political imagination. And fourth, propose what we want in our own way. You translated yourself brilliantly. It couldn't be better. And the way that she shared that discovery, that we have to go, the movements have to go to the affected people and make alliances with those who are fighting the deprivation of public services to the most vulnerable, whether migrants and refugees, poor and working class communities of color, or Indigenous communities here on Turtle Island. Thank you, Miriam, for bringing those lessons to us and sharing them in organizer level of detail. Postal workers. We have some of the best posties for miles around here with us. I didn't want to insult any posties that were just a few kilometers beyond. The postal workers are re-energizing the Delivering Community Power campaign. And as someone who was there at the birth of that vision, I'm just so excited by that. I can share with you that this summer, a hybrid electric vehicle will be roaming the land, pulling a trailer festooned with solar panels to make the vision of delivering community power come to life. A mobile postcard from the future. Will there be a mock-up of an ATM from our future postal bank? Will they deliver locally produced food from a cooperative supermarket to households of seniors and other vulnerable people who need that help? Whatever they do, they'll be taking their bold vision of the post office, one of our most cherished public services, as the future hub of energy and economic transformation to the next level. And speaking of postal banking, one of the most remarkable sessions at this conference was the one on public banking right here in this room. Now, I knew Gwendolyn Hall-Smith as an internationally admired expert of all things banking. I knew she had a dizzying command of the many different flavors of public banking, from the straight-up state-owned Bank of North Dakota to the Sparkasse banks in Germany, which together form the country's largest bank and invest only in local and regional economies. To the US Postal Bank of years gone by. Of course, we had postal banking in Canada. That law is still on the books. To the market failure in American Samoa when the last private bank branch closed just a couple of years ago and a public bank sprang up in its place. Gwendolyn did not disappoint. You were amazing. But when she talked about a California State Senate proposal for a public bank to provide financial services to the marijuana industry, and then she proceeded to call to this stage a gifted guitarist and to the tune of an old Fats Waller song sang a rousing rendition of California Cannabis Cryptocurrency, I knew we were in, how shall we say, a highly creative state. And then Gwendolyn followed that by inviting us to discuss what we would, off this menu of banking models, what we would choose to work in Canada. And she told us that it didn't have to be just one, that we could order anything off the menu. And then I really thought she was channeling the spirit of the financial products under discussion. And then this hallway, this gallery of our proposals and our future work together. And this afternoon in the open space, we really took a trip together to the all-you-can-eat buffet of bold new public proposals. We talked about public water systems that advance the human right to water, public control of forests, cities as a site of resistance and sanctuary, and public innovation. And then there's this remarkable proposal, which someone may have handed to you. I'm sort of thinking of it as the Montreal Declaration. Might already be some competing documents with the same title. It's untitled, unsigned, who knows from what heavenly imagination this has descended. It's very much in draft form, if you didn't get that. But this piece of paper right here takes on some of the biggest private players in our Canadian economy, the telephone companies and the cable monopolies, those bastards. And it proposes a 4-step process. Miriam, you're already having influence on our discourse here. To first heavily regulate them and their monopolistic practices, then break them up, nationalize them, and implement, quote, cooperative federated control in the public interest so that we can build a data commons of the future. I love it. More. We are really unleashing the creativity and imagination required to dream a better public into being, to think big, organize fast, assemble coalitions across silos, to put forward an irresistible vision that can build mass support. Who doesn't want to fight the phone company? Even as we fight the forces that would privatize and commodify every aspect of life itself. Now, of course, there are still many tensions and challenges to problematize and confront. I'll just name one because I think it underlies a lot of our discussions here. I think foremost among those challenges is the tension between the sheer scale of the crises we face and the need for urgent transformative action, whether climate change or inequality, racism and colonialism, the need for truly massive change, and yet a real lack of models at that scale that are truly democratic. In other words, we have yet to find an answer for this dilemma of scale and urgency versus deep democracy and good process. There's no time left, especially when you think about the climate clock, to gradually build networks of bottom-up grassroots solutions. And yet we have no patience, nor should we have any patience, for the undemocratic model of old-school, state-sponsored, top-down change. We need national levels of finance, legislation, and scale, but with local participation and accountability and control. And we have to do it all on a serious deadline. But that is just a challenge that, as Howard Zinn might have said, we are going to have to solve on a moving train, because we cannot wait to get started. So if this conference has stirred anything in me, it is this. The true fight for the public is the fight for the future. And the battleground is our collective imagination. Our weapons in this moment are our dreams of a better life for all. Our fuel is our undiluted hope, our insistence that we can, that we will, that we must transform our society to set free the creativity and potential in every single one of us. The future is public, and the public is all of us. This conference was a crucial leap forward towards a world run by and for the many, not the few. And I was really proud to share it with you. Thank you.